Giorgio Tsoukalos. Welcome to Late Night in the Midlands, Giorgio.
Thanks very much for having me on. Pleasure to be here.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time out to be with us. Love the work that you do, and I want to get it out of the way right in the start here. We've had bets. Well, I'm not involved in this, but there's I hear talk of bets going on in the chat room of who's going to ask you who does your hair first. So, if I could, I'd just like to get that out of the way.
Well, I don't think I can reveal that source, though.
Okay.
Secret.
It might save a lot of marriages. All right, so Giorgio, if you would tell everybody a little bit about yourself and how you got going in this, and maybe you could tell us a little bit about the series and how it came about.
Oh, sure, absolutely. I'm the publisher of Legendary Times Magazine and the director of the AASRA, which stands for Archaeology, Astronautics, and SETI Research Association, otherwise known as the Center for Ancient Astronaut Research. And I started this organization together with a guy by the name of Eric von Daniken in 1998. And I'm sure everyone is familiar with Eric von Daniken. He wrote a book called Chariots of the Gods in the 70s, and he's still active. I, in fact, talked to him earlier today, and he is currently writing book number 32. And since 1998, we've been publishing Legendary Times Magazine together, which is the only magazine in the world that's exclusively dedicated to the ancient astronaut field. So, the idea is that the stuff that we publish in there is all about the ancient mysteries, but of course with a focus on ancient aliens. So it's not anything else where, some other alternative history experts, they're maybe looking at some other ideas or other interpretations, but our magazine is strictly ancient astronauts, which suggests that possibly Earth has been visited by extraterrestrials in the remote past.
I believe that it has, and I know a lot of my listeners do as well. And, I even believe that we've had intelligent civilizations living on this planet way before what they tell us now. So I agree with you there. Now, is the History Channel this going to be a long deal here with the ancient aliens? Because I'll tell you, a very popular show. I love it myself.
Well, thank you, and I'm really happy to hear that, because it's really a wonderful success, and I'm really proud and also excited to tell all of our listeners tonight that we are, in fact, in production for Season 3 of Ancient Aliens right now, and the first episode of Season 3 will premiere sometime in the summer of 2011, so we're only a couple of months away from Season 3, the premiere of Season 3, which is very exciting. And we've, look, the series, for the first time ever, there's a series out there that, doesn't take a viewpoint where, the questions are asked and then 2 seconds later you have a debunker trying to debunk everything. For the first time ever, we're actually not allowed, I don't want to say allowed, because I don't think that was ever the case, that stuff was prohibited or forbidden and things like that, but the first time ever, the History Channel, for example, that network has seen the light that, guess what? We do have a point. Something is going on, and why not present it? Because all we do with Ancient Aliens is we ask questions, and if those questions are uncomfortable, so be it. Who cares? It's all good.
That's right, exactly. That's how I run this show. We bring stuff to people, and they have questions, and of course there's always the debunkers, and I have fun with them for a little while, and then I just, leave it alone, because, there's always somebody out there trying to debunk something, and I don't know if it's because they're afraid of the truth, or they're just paid to be out there and do that. I don't know.
Well, and what an extraordinary day to be having the interview today, because of the whole thing that Obama had to go through about finally releasing his birth certificate, or his long-form birth certificate. I mean, it was an absolute circus about all of this, and for our president to have to go through something like this, I mean, there's bigger problems this country has. So it's unbelievable what a sideshow it has been, and hopefully this has all been put to rest now. But you'll never know, because, like I said, you can present something to someone, and even though it's right in front of them, crystal clear, they'll still say that this is wrong, or this can't be like this, or no, you're wrong.
Well, you know,
it's unbelievable.
Questions are already coming out about it. I seen it on the internet already. You know, there's people already asking questions, and I know Donald Trump is taking great pride in feeling that he forced it.
It's really amazing that, you know, he's taking that slap to his face, and he's using it to his advantage. Unbelievable. I mean, you got to give it to him. The guy's entertaining. That's all I have to say.
Oh, he sure is. He sure is. All right, Giorgio, what is the ancient astronaut theory? Can you tell us what your opinion is on that, your research?
Of course. I mean, look, the basic definition of the ancient astronaut theory is to determine whether or not extraterrestrials, flesh and blood extraterrestrials, mind you, have visited Earth in the remote past. That's kind of the definition of it. And of course, there's many subcategories. How we try to prove this. Mm-hmm. And the big one, obviously, is where all over the world, it doesn't matter what ancient culture or what continent you go to, in ancient times, there are always these descriptions of the gods. And today, mainstream archaeologists, they themselves say that most all of the ancient monuments were in fact built or constructed because of the gods, to worship them, to honor them, to have rituals about them, what have you. And they openly say this, that all these ancient monuments were built for the gods. And then they pat each other on the back, they go home, and they say, case closed. Well, see, to people like me, that this is where the investigation begins. Because if I hear or read in ancient texts that these structures were built for the gods, then my immediate question is, who were these gods? Mm-hmm. Were they really just a figment of our ancestors' imagination? Or, as I think, were they really flesh and blood extraterrestrials whom our ancestors misinterpreted or mistook for divine spiritual beings, which of course they never were? Because, look, to sum this up really fast, Arthur C. Clarke said it best in his world-famous quote when he said that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. And that saying right there, that sums up the ancient astronaut theory to a T, because our ancestors were highly intelligent. They were as intelligent as we are today. However, their technological frame of reference was way more primitive than our technological frame of reference today. So they did not understand the nuts and bolts aspects behind those visits of flesh and blood extraterrestrials. So they thought they were angels, they thought they were gods, they thought they were magicians, even though they were merely beings, flesh and blood beings, with highly advanced technology.
Sure, I've said this before as well. If you go back to ancient times and you have a UFO landing and these beings get out and they have all these technologies and these abilities to use their mind, maybe even to communicate, sure, they'd be mistaken for gods. I would think so.
Exactly. And, over the last, especially over the last 80 to 100 years, we've made leaps and bounds in technology. So imagine just if you could talk to your great-great-grandfather and have the capability of, going back in time and then bring that person to the modern day age, to today, your great-grandfather alone, or even, well, let's say great-great-grandfather, that person would freak out in our modern-day society, but because that person would not know about television sets, especially flat screens, or an iPad, or an iPhone, or an airplane, for crying out loud. So that person would freak out, but over time, let's say after a week or two, that person definitely could adjust to our modern times, and I'm even bold enough to say that that's your great-great-grandfather, after receiving training for about 4 or 5 months, that person, your great-great-grandfather, would know how to fly a plane. And that does not mean, because that is only because his frame of reference, technologically speaking, was, kind of primitive. But once your great-great-grandfather would be introduced to our modern-day technology, that person would understand it 100% if properly instructed or properly trained.
That's right. If you took somebody, I think, from 1970 and froze them then in 1970 and woke them up right now, they would be amazed to some of the technologies that would be there for them. So, you go back that far, and oh yeah.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And now imagine doing that going back 5,000 years. It's of course, our ancestors would have regarded these beings as gods, even though, and I've said this many, many times on the radio, I've said it on the show, gods like that do not exist. Our ancestors thought they were gods, but they never were. It's as if you and I, if we were to show up on a faraway planet, and let's just hypothesize that on that planet we encounter intelligent life, but let's just assume also that that intelligent life isn't necessarily far advanced technologically speaking. Mm-hmm. So what will we do? Will we just stand back and watch? Yeah, we will do that for a couple of months in order to learn their ways, maybe their language or whatever. But then we will teach them a few things. And guess what? 1,000 or 2,000 or 3,000 years into their future, you and I will have become ancient astronauts in that society.
All right, so, Giorgio, we got to hold it right there. We've got to take a quick break, and then I want to pick right back up on this. We're back.
Wonderful.
All right, so we just left off with talking about, if you go back 5,000 years, how different it would be.
Yes, no, absolutely, because you see that whole idea about, those extraterrestrials, appearing as gods to our ancestors, interestingly enough, I'm not alone in, having proposed that concept, because I was just at a lecture by Dr. Michio Kaku, the world's most eminent astrophysicist and also co-creator of string theory, and that is exactly how he started out his lecture, by suggesting that our society today would appear godlike just in front of our immediate ancestors. And by immediate ancestors, he was only referring to 2 or 3 generations earlier than our generation today. And so what he then also proposed, and I actually disagree with him, he said that, let's say that you and I would be able to travel forward in time 2 or 3 or even 4 generations, mm-hmm. that our children's, our grand-grandchildren or grand-grand-grandchildren, that if we were to meet, you and I, if we could meet our great-grandchildren, those great-grandchildren would appear to us as gods because they have this incredibly advanced technology. Now, I understand what he's saying, but I have to disagree with it because I think that we today, as a technological society, we will understand that our great-grandchildren will have access to this technology, and that they're not divine or magical, that their devices or that their tools are not magical or divine, but it's technology. But that does not apply to a generation or generations that have lived 2, 3, 4, 5,000 years ago in the past.
You know, in some cases, I've always thought of them as being smarter than us, because they seem to have been able to, I mean, they knew what was happening out in the stars. They knew what was going to happen out in the stars. And, I mean, with what? Did they have telescopes? I mean, how did they know this stuff? Or were the gods telling them this stuff? So, you know.
Exactly, and that is exactly the point, that, yes, you're absolutely right, that our ancestors did, in fact, know. And I'm talking deep, deep antiquity here. I'm not talking, you know, a couple of hundred years ago. We're talking thousands of years ago, that they were, in fact, aware of so many things going on in the stars. And, you know, you asking the question, well, how did they know? Did the gods tell them? And the answer is a resounding absolutely yes. Because that is what the ancient texts are, in fact, saying, that the gods, or those extraterrestrials, not only were they here in flesh and blood form thousands of years ago, but at the same time, they taught us in various academic disciplines, such as mathematics, engineering, architecture, agriculture, and astronomy. So all these things are written down in ancient texts, and here we are, you know, modern or Western science or Western archaeologists who are saying that all of these ancient texts where it is described that these humanoid beings descended from the sky in flying shields and glowing orbs, that all those descriptions and those references are nothing else but fantasy.
Well, you know, it's enough for me to look at it and say there's definitely something here. I mean, I want to get into several of the things you talk about on Ancient Aliens for sure, because it all is fascinating. And I mean, getting the answers to these type of questions, I mean, really can tell us where we actually came from. One thing I want to get into is the dragon snakes. If you could tell us a little bit about that. I know it's one of your favorite topics. I've heard you talk about it on Coast. And so what were they?
Well, it's really interesting, and the fact is that all around the world in ancient texts, especially in ancient texts of China, and also all over South America and Central America, there are these stories of the flying snakes. Mm-hmm. Now, in South America, they are referred to as the winged serpent, and the deities that we're talking about here, anyone can go and Google this. The deity's name is Kukulkan or Quetzalcoatl, and what we know is that a long time ago, a really incredible culture existed that apparently flourished or had the height of its culture when they were visited by a flying serpent, a flying or winged snake. And anybody that knows anything, I mean, there is this site in in Mexico called Chichen Itza. And every year, on the 21st of June and the 21st of December, at the time of the winter and the summer solstice, there is a game or a shadow play that takes place on the Chichen Itza pyramid that looks like as if a winged serpent or a serpent is descending from the sky and then disappears again into the sky. Now, right there, we have what's referred to as a living mythology, something that we still can witness today, that a pyramid at Chichen Itza was built and configured in such a way that it would, in fact, on a certain day and time of the year, it would show a snake by shadows, not of course a real snake, but by shadows, a snake descending from the sky and then a snake taking off again into the sky. Now, halfway around the world, in China, we have references of dragon snakes or dragons, where we have these dragons that still, today we see them in the movies, that there's some type of biological entities and fire spewing and things like this. But if you read the actual translation of ancient Chinese texts, it never really says that these dragons were in fact real living beings, because many, many times these dragons were described as being made out of metal, and they were made with gleaming iron, and that their fire came out of the backs, not out of the front. And so when I hear stuff like this, all I have to wonder is, look, did our ancestors really see biological entities like dragons swirl around the sky, or did they see some type of machine that they misinterpreted to be a living organism? And in my opinion, the answer is clear.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that the fire coming out of the back, and obviously this had to have been some kind of a spacecraft or a vehicle of some sort that they were flying in. Absolutely. And they had described a lot of this stuff on cave wall carvings as well. So I would think that they had to have been drawing what they seen, or at least what they could interpret they're seeing.
Right, of course, and that's the thing that you just mentioned cave wall drawings. I mean, we can go back 20,000 years and we see very bizarre drawings in various caves on every continent all around the world where, look, it's very clear that there are very ordinary sceneries, like, of deer and cows and people, hunting them with bows and arrow, ordinary, hunter-gatherer scenes. There's absolutely no question that these things exist. However, what's more fascinating, in my opinion, is the fact that sometimes in and around these scenes, we also find very bizarre figures that look like spacemen, big beings with big halos around their head, and something that looks as if it's a being inside an astronaut suit and a hermetically sealed helmet and things like that, or flying discs and weird rays coming out of those flying discs. I mean, it's very, very bizarre. And again, our ancestors, they were incredibly gifted artisans, so they knew exactly when they were drawing a cow. They knew exactly when they were drawing a deer or a human being. And then, right next to it, you have another creature or another humanoid being that looks like an extraterrestrial or that we think might have been extraterrestrial. And to suggest that right there, the artist just merely did this because, he was smoking dope or he, was drunk or something like this, that to me is an insult to the artistry of our ancestors.
I agree with you. There's just so much evidence, Giorgio, that really show. I mean, this Darwin's theory. I've had Michael Cremo on, and I agree with him that I don't buy that either. I don't think we came from ape. I think it goes. It's a lot more complex than that.
Of course, and Michael, of course, is a dear colleague of mine, and the work that he has done into extreme human antiquity is absolutely extraordinary. And what's so fascinating is that another aspect of the ancient astronaut theory, of course, is the idea that we essentially became humans or human only after extraterrestrials performed a targeted genetic manipulation of our genes. And what I'm referring to here is not very simple, but it's kind of simple. It's very easy to follow. Because, yes, look, today in schools and all around the world, what's generally accepted pertaining to evolution is Darwin's theory. And what nobody talks about, including the scientists, is the fact that when Darwin came up with his idea, with his theory, and he published this in this book called The Origin of Species, in the very last chapter, he says, and throughout the book, by the way, he actually says that, yes, I'm very happy with my theory here. It makes a lot of sense. But there are numerous shortfalls or shortcomings, and I don't know how to explain them away. And that is why today, and anyone that knows only a little bit about evolution knows this, that is why today we have something that we all refer to as the missing link. And the missing link is where it gets really interesting, and that is, you see, obviously there is a fossil record. There's absolutely no question that the fossil record exists. However, what is also crystal clear is that evolution suggests that if you look at our human ancestors, that there should be a gradual process or a gradual stage from point A to point B, from point B to point C, and so on and so forth, between each species. And that it's a gradual, quote-unquote, evolution from one species to the next. However, the fossil record shows that there is absolutely no transitionary species, that have never been found any transitionary species between all of our human ancestors, and that is why we have this missing link. It's this huge gaps between species, and that is where the ancient astronaut theory comes in, by suggesting that the reason why that is happening is because all throughout history, all these species were a direct creation or a genetic experiment by extraterrestrials over time.
That's right. I was going to say, I don't see it much as a missing link, more so as a link that's out of reach. Outer space, I think that's where that missing link can be found.
Of course. And beautifully said. You're 100% correct.
Okay. Giorgio, now I'd like to get into this, the Bridge of Benpool. If you could tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, the Bridge of Benpool is a very interesting little structure in India, and anyone can go and Google that tonight. Benpool is spelled B-E-N-P-U-L, and sorry, it's B-H-I-M-P-U-L. It's B-H-I-M-P-U-L, and it's called the Bridge of Benpool, and basically what it is, it's this in a region of India that still today is considered to be very sacred, and an area where a long time ago the gods appeared from the sky. There used to be this ravine, this gorge that would keep these two villages apart, because this gorge would just be too wide for people to just simply cross it. And so one day, one of the gods decided, well, these two villages really should have more communication, so I'm going to build them a bridge. So essentially, this god, quote-unquote, lowercase g, has absolutely nothing to do with, the spirit of creation or the universe, created or put a huge monolith on top of that gorge, and so making essentially a bridge. And so it's this massive stone that is now connecting one side with the other, and apparently, according to the geologists that have investigated this, and as far as I know, personally I have never been there, but that stone is not indigenous to the area. So right there, that is a huge, huge mystery.
Yeah, how the heck did they move it? Exactly. How the heck did they get it there?
Right, and we're talking high up in the mountains, too. I mean, we're talking it was placed over a gorge. So it's not like, it's a very, very inaccessible point.
That's amazing. You know, it brings me to things like the pyramids and just how did they move these rocks? How did they get this stuff done? They had to have had some kind of outside help.
Well, and I'm really glad you bring that up because, look, of course, I am not saying that our ancestors did not know how to transport stones or that they did not know how to cut stones, because obviously they did. There's no question about that. However, I am not referring to little blocks of stone. I'm not referring to blocks made of sand or limestone. What I'm interested in is how the hell did they cut these gigantic stones that are upwards of 250, 500, 800, 1,000 metric tons from point A to point B, and when these stones are not even limestone, but they are in fact granite, they're andesite, they're diorite, they're incredibly hard igneous rock types, and that is the stuff that I'm interested in, because it is a fact that there are stonemasons today, and some of which we featured actually in season 1 of Ancient Aliens, who have come forward and say that for no amount of money in the world would they volunteer or even attempt to recreate some of these ancient stone blocks that have been carved or cut a long time ago. And now who am I going to listen to? Some professors that say that all of this was achieved with chicken bones and rope, or a modern-day stonemason who does this for a living on a day-to-day basis, and they say it cannot be done with modern technology.
That's what I was going to say. I mean, we can't even duplicate this stuff today.
Right.
You know, and they were able to do it thousands of years ago, and I mean, I think it's deliberately being kept from us. I think that there's probably some record outside of what yourself and your colleagues have found. I bet there's some solid proof somewhere, and somebody's got to it first, or it just hasn't been found yet, one or the other. But I think that they're hiding the truth from us. They don't want us to know that we came from out there, I don't think. And I believe we did. I think we came from the stars, Giorgio. I think that's how, I think we're meant to go out and seed those stars as well.
Oh, we will go back. We will absolutely go back. And that is what the whole, myth is of all of, the Native American mythology, that planet Earth, according to their ideas and philosophies, has been seeded by what they refer to as the star people. And here we are, and, most people are laughing at these stories, and I think it's high time for us to sit back and reconsider all of those stories.
I agree. Now, before we come up on our break, there is another question I'd like to try to hit you with, so maybe we can just try to answer this one as quickly as possible. What does ancient history say about 2012 or past catastrophic events? Me, myself, I think 2012 is just a deception. I don't think anything's going to happen on 2012, but everybody talks about it, so I'll have to ask you.
Well, and that'll make two of us, because you're right. Absolutely nothing will happen in 2012. But if and when we come back from the break, I can tell you exactly why nothing will happen. But quickly to say, I would like to say that the reason why nothing will happen is because it's not even 2011 right now today. So right there, if we're off, as some have suggested, by at least 20 years in our own calendar. Well, because right now it's either 2031 or it's 1991. So, I mean, right there, see, and nobody talks about these things, that we ourselves, our calendar is off by at least 20 years. And so, right there, that renders each and every discussion about 2012 completely useless.
Yeah, I've gotten into that a few times. I never knew how far off it was. I've heard different stories, but one thing I do know is that the calendar is off, and it's off by maybe some years even. So,
right, and the thing is that the Maya themselves, anyone who has studied this, the Maya don't say or never said that the world will come to an end. All it says is that a period of time ends, and usually if a period of time ends, hey, at the end of each year on December 31st, what do you look forward to? January 1st. So, it just goes on. A new period in time will begin. When your calendar runs out at the end of the year, what do? You run to the store and you get yourself a new one. Same with the Mayan calendar.
That's right. I don't believe that calendar ever said the end of the world was coming. I do believe it indicated to some kind of solar activity with the sun. Now, I'm no professional on it, but that's what I've been told. And everybody who's waiting for 2012 to be the end, I just don't see it.
I keep on saying that the only thing that we really have to worry about is the huge hangover we'll all suffer on the 22nd of December, 2012.
All right, Giorgio, we've got a break coming up here. We're going to be a few minutes, so I'll get right back to you just as soon as we're done here on this station break. So, okay, Giorgio, so we're back. So we can get into that just a little further with this whole Mayan calendar thing. And explain to people how it is off and why we shouldn't really expect anything to happen in 2012.
Oh, sure, absolutely, because you see, here's the thing that, there's a few arguments to be made for this, and that is that, if you look at the history of our modern-day calendar, we went from 1 BC to 1 AD. There never was a year 0, for example. So mathematically, that's incorrect. So right there, we're off by at least 1 year right there. So it's either 2010 or 2012 already. And, then in the Middle Ages, it is very clear, and professors or academics at Berkeley and also in Italy have determined that in the Middle Ages, when the monks were in charge of recording our calendars, they made mistakes up to 7 to 8 years. So, 8 plus 1 is 9. So it's either 2001 or it's already 2020. And then thirdly, do we really know beyond a shadow of a doubt that our calendar began on or in the year that Jesus died on the cross? And the answer is absolutely no. And the fact is that there's even theologians now out there today, and anyone can go Google this, did Jesus really die at age 31 or 32 or 33? And everyone will say that in all likelihood, he died in 3 or 4 or even 5 BC. So, so there's all these questions about our own calendar, and many people, and especially mathematicians and astronomers have, or not astronomers, but archaeologists have said that the Mayan calendar is in fact more precise than our own calendar. And that's not a joke. I mean, that is the truth. And so it's really amazing to see that another culture's calendar is more significant or more accurate than ours. And so now we know that, we're off by many, many years, that it's not 2011 in this, today. And, what I find highly fascinating is the fact that everyone is obsessing about the end of this calendar, but nobody is even addressing when the calendar actually began.
You're so right. Absolutely.
No, and the thing is that, the scholars have determined, there's multiple start dates. So over time, they came to agreement, and today, the scholars agree that the calendar began on the 11th of August, 3114 BC. Now, we all know that in 3114 BC, the Maya did not exist. So what the heck compelled them to commence or start their calendar in 3114 BC? And the answer is very clear and very simple. According to the Chilam Balam book, which is the book of the Jaguar priests, which is an ancient book that was written down later by the Spanish chroniclers, in it says that back in 3114 BC, on that 11th of August, that is when the road to the stars, and I'm quoting this, the road to the stars descended from the sky, and the 9 and the 13 gods came down to rectify the things that at one time were wronged. And, I mean, what a beautiful way of circumscribing something that has to do with space travel. The road to the stars, it cannot be more clear. That is not fantasy. It is a direct reference to someone visiting from deep space.
That's right, and their interpretations, again, would obviously be different than ours today. So I think people actually sometimes misinterpret this information quite often. Giorgio, you with me?
Yes.
Oh,
no,
okay.
I said, of course, definitely.
Okay. Now, somebody's asking me about Darwin Museum in Moscow. Now, what type of discoveries can be found there?
Well, the Darwin Museum in Moscow is very interesting because over time what they've done is they've collected a whole bunch of skulls that have been found all around the world. But in one of the display cases, see what they do is they don't. Yes, of course they have skulls, made on display. But then they also have these forensic artists that have worked on some of these skulls by trying to recreate what some of these skulls looked like when they were still alive. They put on the muscle fiber, and they put on the skin and the hair and things like this. Just like we do today in modern day forensics, trying to recreate a body and things like that. So they applied the same techniques to some skulls that they found in Russia, and in one of the display cases, there is a skull, or actually it's not a skull, but it's a head, and that head, and of course it's plastic. I mean, it's not real. It's not real skin. It's a recreation, a replica of what the forensic artist thinks this creature or this humanoid being looked like at the time of it being alive. And what's really interesting is that it's got these big eyes, it's got this the big forehead and a small chin, so it kind of it looks very it looks like the proverbial extraterrestrial. I mean, very humanoid looking, obviously, but there's something off about it. And so I find it quite a fascinating story. And anyone who is interested in this, we will be publishing this story in one of our upcoming issues of Legendary Times magazine.
Okay, great. Now, what's coming up next for you?
Well, I'm deep in the middle of producing Season 3 of Ancient Aliens. In fact, I'm headed back to L.A. Tomorrow to film more interviews for the show, and Eric von Daniken has in fact been interviewed today for the program, and I'm preparing the next issue of Legendary Times, and busy.
Yeah, that pretty much sums it up, huh? Busy. What do we know, or at least think we know, about the crystal skulls? Now, that's something I've taken a lot of interest in. I don't know a whole lot about it, but I definitely want to. What do we know about those?
Well, all around the world, especially in museums, there have been crystal skulls that have been found. And when I say crystal skulls, or when you say crystal skulls, we're not referring to, little toy-sized, objects, but we're referring to crystal skulls that are the size of actual human heads. So they're big honking things. I mean, they're solid. And, the most famous skull that that is in existence today that we know of is the Mitchell-Hedges skull. And the Mitchell-Hedges skull is very, very interesting because it is, or was, manufactured of one big piece of quartz crystal. And when And it's absolutely beautiful to look at, and there is absolutely no flaw in it. It's crystal clear. It's absolutely beautiful. And what's really fascinating is the fact that in the 60s, when this skull at one point was examined and started to hit the lecture circle with his caretaker at the time, the caretaker brought or was invited to bring the skull to the fledgling laboratories of Hewlett-Packard. And when they brought, and the reason why they brought it to Hewlett-Packard is because today we have to understand, and also back then, that all of computer technology is based on crystal technology, because crystals today, every computer as its data storage medium uses artificial crystals. That's where all of the data in computers today are stored. So because Hewlett-Packard, of course, specialized and still specializes in these things, they brought the skull to Hewlett-Packard and they exposed the skull to a whole slew of tests. And afterwards, the conclusion of the scientists, and this is on the record, was or is that they essentially concluded that this skull should not exist because we couldn't replicate something like this today because it would shatter. Because every crystal is, it has a certain axis to it, and you can only polish a crystal if you polish it with its axis, or not by not going against the grain. And the tests at Hewlett-Packard have concluded that the skull was in fact polished against its axis. So they were creating this against the grain of the crystal. And that means, or that would mean, or essentially, it means that the skull would shatter if you would attempt to do this. The fact that it did not shatter, presents a great mystery. I mean, some modern day archaeologists, of course, they have all said that the crystal skull, the Mitchell Hedges skull, and many of the other skulls that have been found, there's there's 7 known crystal skulls that we have found so far, out of 13 apparently. They all say that they're all fake. So, I mean, it's just not right to be so closed off to investigations.
Oh, absolutely. When I hear anybody say that those are fake, I mean, I'd like to see real testing done on these things and be for sure before I would ever say that. And if they are real...
The testing was done at Hewlett-Packard, and they concluded that this thing should not exist, and they had no idea how this could be possible. So to suggest that, all the engineers that did the testing back in the 60s, that they were all buffoons, I mean, that's a ridiculous argument, and that's what we're doing today. I mean, not you and me, but that's what science does, and that to me is not very scientific.
It's not. I find with a lot of science today, if they can't measure it, if they can't figure it out, then it don't exist. And, I thought science was about getting to the answers and keeping all possibilities open. And that's what it should be.
Absolutely.
Now, these crystal skulls, I mean, they could very well hold millions of years of information in them, couldn't they?
Well, yes, and that's, of course, one of the ideas, that because we use crystal technology in today's computers as storage, it is one idea that's out there is that these crystal skulls contain information. Because, I mean, obviously, yes, there's definitely one skull or 2 skulls that have been found that turned out to be modern-day recreations, or modern-day, not recreations, but modern-day creations. So there's absolutely no question that something like that exists. But that does not apply to the older skulls that were, found 100 years ago or 200 years ago and things like this. So, and the idea is that if, these 13 skulls, let's say, were to come together, that they would somehow release or get activated and then, divulge some type of information. Who knows? But at the same time, we don't know where the on switch is. Go figure.
When I hear about this stuff, I think about Superman. They get these crystals together, and all of a sudden, the holograph comes, and the guy shows up and starts giving them all the information through the universe. And if we had something like that, that would just be truly amazing. And if that did exist, I don't think we can count on mainstream science or the media or the government to tell us. They would keep it to themselves.
Well, that depends who gets there first, and right. to suggest that the government has the upper hand at all times, I think is ridiculous, because after all, it's the people who are in charge. That's what everybody forgets. That's just the way it is, and we've seen the most perfect of the most perfect examples in the last 2-3 months in the Middle East. What's going on over there is 100%. It was achieved by the people, not by the governments and not by foreign governments and things like this, but by the people, by going out in the streets. Now, what's really, which means that, in the end, it's us who are in charge and not the governments. So, what's really interesting about the crystal skulls also is the fact that, according to ancient or Native American myths, there are, apparently, according to their ideas or philosophies, there are 13 skulls. And each skull represents a world within our galaxy. And so apparently there are 12 worlds out there, and each skull contains the knowledge of one of these worlds, and the 13th skull, which apparently is the biggest one of all, contains a cumulative knowledge of all 12 worlds combined. And those skulls were brought here as an information piece, or as pieces of information, because according to Native American lore, our planet is not only the youngest and least advanced, but also Native Americans refer to our planet as the planet of children, and aren't they right?
Yeah, they're very right. Absolutely. We're coming up on a break in just a couple minutes. After the break, I want to take a call. But I did want to ask you quickly before the break. Now, the moon, what do you think? Do you think that if we were to scale the moon, the entire moon, that we would find that maybe some kind of humanoid has been there before us?
But possibly. I have no idea. Isn't there a movie coming about this in the summer? So I guess we should go watch that movie. No, but look, all I know is that we were most certainly up there in the '60s, and there's no question, in the '70s, and there's absolutely no question about that. And is it possible that other civilizations landed on the moon or were on Mars? Absolutely yes. Do I have concise evidence for it? Absolutely no.
Yeah, Richard C. Hoagland talks a lot about structures on Mars and how some of them are similar to the structures here. And after the break, I want to get into the Puma Punku just a little bit. Maybe you can explain that to us. That's one of the things that Richard talks about and says that there's similarities to structures up on Mars. So we're going to take this break, and when we come back, we'll get them questions answered, and we'll take a phone call. Giorgio, we're going to go to the phones, my friend. You ready?
Absolutely.
All right, let's do it. We've got Sean from Illinois. You're on Late Night in the Midlands. Thanks for waiting, Sean.
Hey, Mike. Hey, Giorgio.
Hello.
Hi. Good evening. Hey, watch your show a lot. Anyways, want to get to the point. What's your take on the Goddess of Ur genome project, or genome, if you want to say that?
Well, look, all over Sumeria, ancient Sumeria, there are references to the Anunnaki. And anyone that has read anything about ancient Sumeria knows that the correct translation for Anunnaki is those who from the heavens came. And that is a widely accepted fact that that is the correct translation. And so the interesting thing is that in ancient Sumeria, we also find the old writing of that time was called cuneiform, and it's essentially this writing that they etched into these clay tablets. And there are some clay tablets that have been found that are today referred to as the Enuma Elish, or the tablets of creation. And in those tablets, we have concise references that a long, long time ago, the heavens opened and the gods, or the Anunnaki, descended from the sky and to teach mankind in various scientific or academic disciplines. And so, we know today, and this is something that even, mainstream archaeology agrees with, that, one of the earliest, quote-unquote, advanced civilizations that we have was, in fact, in Sumeria, and that they, for example, quote-unquote, invented the cobblestones, and they cobblestone streets, and they invented the street grid that we can find in New York City today, and so on and so forth. But it also says that all of these accomplishments were only possible, or that the Sumerians only achieved them because they received direct instructions by or from these Anunnaki. And what do we do today? We just, if we have, let's say, a page of text, and in the first paragraph it says something to the effect that, something happened here, and then the grain was collected, and then they put it into big tubs, and they moved the grain from here to there. Now, in the second paragraph, it says that, in order to facilitate the transportation of the grain, and this is a hypothetical, it doesn't say this anywhere in the ancient texts, what I'm about to say, but it's an idea or a hypothetical. And then in the second text, it says that the grain was transported from point A to point B as if by magic through the air because one of the gods helped them. And then in the third paragraph, it says, and that is when the grain reached the city and it was, distributed amongst the people. Well, mainstream archaeology, what they do today is they take the first and the third paragraph and they will take that as writ. It's sacred, it's dogma, that is exactly what happened, but they take out the part in the middle where it says that the grain was flown from point A to point B. And we have many such examples of ancient stories where the gods are described to fly through the air, interacting with our ancestors, yet whenever the gods interacted, that part, the ancients, the archaeologists are saying, that is something that is, a figment of our ancestors' imagination, and especially the parts where the gods are flying around in flying machines.
Mm. Well, we're related to the Anunnaki, right? By slave choice, right? They created us to relieve their toils in the mines, right? So we were created with them.
Actually, no. I soundly reject that notion. That is a theory that has been brought forth by my dear and late colleague Zecharia Sitchin, that we were created as a slave race in order to mine gold. But I wholeheartedly and 100% reject that notion that we were created as a slave species.
Okay. Thanks, George.
All right. Thanks a lot for the call, Sean. I appreciate it. And the line is now open, 803-748-9293. And I agree with you, Giorgio. I hate to think that we were put here as a slave race. And if so, they say that every 3,600 years they come back. I don't think they'd get too far with us as far as trying to get us to work for them now. So,
and look, I mean, like I said, Zecharia Sitchin, a wonderful colleague of mine, may he rest in peace and all this. I mean, he's done incredible work, and he has done or has come across incredible references. But to suggest that, and yes, I mean, one of the basic tenets of the ancient astronaut theory is the fact that a target mutation of our genes did in fact take place, but that was not done because whoever was here needed a slave species. I really disagree with that, because gosh, I don't know. I mean, and of course, then there's the idea that they were mining for gold because Planet X or Nibiru's atmosphere was depleting because the atmosphere needed gold, and that gold content was depleting, so they had to go somewhere else, which was Earth, in order to mine the gold, and they didn't want to dirty their hands, so they created us in order to do all the dirty work or the mining work for them. I mean, it's also incredibly elaborate. It's a bit too much. I mean, how about just what we do today in the lab, or if we, go somewhere and we just help a species out?
I hear you. Sounds good to me, Giorgio. Well, let's take another call. We have CT from Kansas. You're on Late Night in the Midlands, my friend.
Hey, how's it going, Michael Vara?
It's going great, buddy. You're on.
Hey, you know what, Giorgio? Right off the bat, I just wanted to thank you for all the work that you're doing. You do a lot to expose the stuff that the mainstream doesn't want anybody to know about. So I just want to give you my appreciation on that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I actually have just one question. I wanted to see what your take is on this. One of the common themes that you find from all of these these beings associated with the gods coming down from the sky is they impart their information. They give this advanced knowledge, and then before they leave, they always promise that they're coming back. In the work that you've done, have you ever seen any indication of when that's supposed to be?
Good question.
Well, I mean, the idea, and of course, that is what many people think today, is that the gods or those extraterrestrials will come back in 2012. And that could not be any further from the truth, because, number one, we all know now that it's not 2011 right now, so absolutely nothing will happen next year, except for, the entire planet going absolutely stir-crazy over this. But you are 100% correct that the extraterrestrials did, in fact, promise to return. And I would vouch, or I would, volunteer to say that those extraterrestrials, whichever species it might be, because we were not just visited by one species, there were, multiple visits over many different periods of times, and, that we will make official contact within our own lifetime. I am sure something will happen in the next 50 to 60 years. It's not going to happen tomorrow, but I really do think that we are living in very extraordinary times. And when that happens, it'll be a great event. It would be a wonderful event that should not be feared, but something that should be looked forward to. And I'm also not suggesting that the moment these extraterrestrials show up, that they will help us with our environmental problems, that they will help us with our energy problems and things like this. I mean, that's all wishful thinking, because we know today that we could propel a car with water alone. We don't need oil to propel our cars. So we have all the tools to make this world a better place, but to sit on our fat butts and wait for extraterrestrials to swoop down from the skies and help us with our problems, that's wishful thinking, and it will never happen.
I agree.
And now, just a follow-up. In a lot of the ancient writings, like the Mahabharata, it reads like Star Wars with battles in the sky.
Mm-hmm.
What are the odds of something like that occurring in our near future?
0.
Okay,
because
good.
It's already happened in the past. Because, I mean, look, if we were to subscribe about the whole idea that ancient aliens, they're progenitors of our culture and our species and so on and so forth, then they have a clear interest in our continued survival. And I've said this on many occasions before. The only reason why our human race is still around in the year 2011 is because of a direct guarantee of survival by extraterrestrials. Because by and large, we are a very stupid and dumb society. And there is no way that we could have survived so far until today with the direct guarantee, unseen of course, by extraterrestrials. So to suggest that if and when they show up publicly or officially, that the first thing they will do is something out of Independence Day or Battle LA, in my opinion, is absolutely ridiculous.
I agree, because if they wanted us gone, they could have done it by now.
Yes, absolutely. And if we were to continue to subscribe to the idea that we are in fact alien hybrids because we have become humans through a genetic mutation of our genes that was done deliberately by flesh and blood extraterrestrials, because like the Old Testament says, that we were created in God's image, God's meaning, Elohim, which is a plural term meaning the gods and not singular or one God. And, of course, whatever was described in the Old Testament wasn't God, but it was, in fact, a misunderstood extraterrestrial. Then that means that a hybridization program has been going on since the beginning of time, since the beginning of our race. And so right there, that means that we are, quote-unquote, valuable to them. So, we don't go out there and on a fine Sunday afternoon to the zoo and just, kill an entire animal population inside a zoo. We just don't do that. And just like we won't do that to animals in the zoo, I don't think extraterrestrials will do that to us. And therefore, incredible minds like Stephen Hawking, in my humble opinion, are absolutely wrong when they suggest that if extraterrestrials show up, they will do the same thing that we have done, or that Western society has done to the indigenous populations around the world. Because there's one fallacy in logic there. The thing that Westerners have done to indigenous populations all around the world is very simple, and that is, it was human against human. It wasn't alien against human. So, I really think that if there's one thing where aliens are a bit more advanced than us, it's the fact that they have learned not to kill each other on their home planet. And that is something that we are still very far away from.
Okay.
Absolutely. Just kind of touching on something you said, and then I'm off of here. You mentioned we don't go to the zoo and just slaughter the animals behind the bars, and I'm reminded of an episode of South Park where the whole episode was viewed from the point of an alien species treating the planet Earth like a reality show.
I've seen that.
I've seen that one too, and that was really funny, absolutely.
All right, thank you for your time, and Mike, keep up the good work.
All right, thanks a lot, CT. You too. CT's over there from Freedomizer Radio, and he checks in with us once in a while. We're getting close to the end here, Giorgio, but I wanted to ask you about Puma Punku really quick, if you can tell us about that, and then I'd like to give you some time at the very end here to go ahead and get out your website and anything else you'd like to.
Sure, absolutely. It would be my pleasure. Puma Punku is an incredible place, and it's situated at 12,500 feet altitude in the highland of the Bolivian Andes in South America. And it's this really weird place because right next to it there is a world-famous archaeological site called Tiwanaku. And every day there are dozens and dozens of tourists that arrive by bus, and they check out Tiwanaku, which is most certainly an Incan site, pre-Incan, of course. And it's magnificent. They have the Temple of the Moon, or the Gate of the Moon, and some really wonderful carvings, some big monoliths that are situated around there. And only about 150 yards, 200 yards away from Tiwanaku is another site called Pumapunku. And what's really fascinating about Pumapunku is that, in contrast to Tiwanaku, which is riddled with ancient hieroglyphics, carvings of ancient South American hieroglyphics, at Pumapunku there is not a single hieroglyphic that can be found. And what we have there are these massive, gigantic stone blocks, these platforms made out of solid granite that at some point all fit together like a puzzle piece, and it's absolutely questionable, or inexplicable actually, how this was done. Now, according to mainstream archaeologists, they say that the local population there, the Aymara Indians, who still today live there, and they're world famous because whenever you see them on TV, you recognize them immediately, because they're the ones that have built these magnificent boats made out of reed and straw that are floating on Lake Titicaca, which is right next to Pumapunku. And we all know Lake Titicaca is the highest navigable lake in the world, and the natural or nature scene up there is absolutely breathtaking. So, and by the way, these boats, these reed boats, they are now today hotels. They're floating hotels, so you can actually spend the night on Lake Titicaca under the stars. It's absolutely gorgeous.
Oh, I want to go.
Yes, must. This summer, by all means, definitely go. Actually, no, go in the winter, because then it's summertime down in the southern hemisphere. So, obviously, this native population, they're very adamant about their history, and they've been very adamant about keeping their oral traditions very much intact to this day. So, when you ask them, who built this? Was it you? They will say, to me, to you, to the archaeologists. They will say, no, actually, it wasn't us. And by the way, this whole place was always in ruins, since we came onto the scene many thousands or many hundreds of years ago. And we don't know, it most certainly was not us, because this place has been in ruins since we stumbled upon the scene. And then, if you ask them, well, okay, if it wasn't you, who built it? And then, without the flinching of an eye, they will point to the sky and say, Los dioses, the gods. Now, who are we to say that their oral traditions are wrong? See, that to me is an insult to human ingenuity. If Western archaeologists are saying that what these ancient cultures are still reporting today as their oral traditions, that all those stories are made up, that all those stories are fake, and that they all contain figments of something that never existed.
I couldn't agree with you more, Giorgio. And I want to say it has been a pleasure, an absolute pleasure having you on this program. And I hope in the near future we can get you back. And I hope that you'll just keep on with the great work that you do, because this stuff is so important. And I want to give you a couple minutes here to go ahead and get out anything else that you'd like to, Giorgio.
Oh, sure. I mean, there isn't much I want to say. People can definitely join me on my Facebook page, which is facebook.com/Giorgio Tsoukalos fans. And, just, check out legendarytimes.com every day. We've got a new, it's got a daily news section that's updated every day. So, just tell your friends about Ancient Aliens Season 3, which will air on the History Channel this summer. And, the more people tune in, the better.
Absolutely, and we got you linked up over at Late Night in the Midlands, and I'll definitely make sure that I get something up there referring to Ancient Aliens because I know it, we watch it in our household all the time, and absolutely love it. And I think it's great work that you and your colleagues are doing, Giorgio.
I love it, and I'll definitely be back. I had a great time.
All right, thank you so much, my friend, and we'll talk to you later.
You got it. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
Right now, and the first episode of season 3 will premiere sometime in the summer of 2011. So we're only a couple of months away from season 3, the premiere of season 3, which is very exciting. And we've, look, the series, for the first time ever, there's a series out there that doesn't take a viewpoint where, the questions are asked and then 2 seconds later you have a debunker trying to debunk everything. For the first time ever, we're actually not allowed, I don't want to say allowed, because I don't think that was ever the case, that stuff was prohibited or forbidden and things like that, but the first time ever, the History Channel, for example, that network has seen the light that, guess what? We do have a point. Something is going on, and why not present it? Because all we do with Ancient Aliens is we ask questions, and if those questions are uncomfortable, so be it. Who cares? It's all good.
That's right, exactly. That's how I run this show. We bring stuff to people, and they have questions, and of course, there's always the debunkers, and I have fun with them for a little while, and then I just leave it alone because there's always somebody out there trying to debunk something, and I don't know if it's because they're afraid of the truth or they're just paid to be out there and do that. I don't know.
Well, and what I'm
Giorgio Tsoukalos, welcome to Late Night in the Midlands, Giorgio.
Thanks very much for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time out to be with us. Love the work that you do, and I want to get it out of the way right in the start here. We've had bets. Well, I'm not involved in this, but there's I hear talk of bets going on in the chat room of who's going to ask you who does your hair first. So if I could, I'd just like to get that out of the way.
Well, I don't think I can reveal that source, though.
Okay.
Secret.
It might save a lot of marriages. All right, so Giorgio, if you would, tell everybody a little bit about yourself and how you got going in this, and maybe you could tell us a little bit about the series and how it came about.
Oh, sure, absolutely. I'm the publisher of Legendary Times magazine and the director of the AASRA, which stands for Archaeology, Astronautics, and SETI Research Association, otherwise known as the Center for Ancient Astronaut Research. And I started this organization together with a guy by the name of Eric von Daniken in 1998. And I'm sure everyone is familiar with Eric von Daniken. He wrote a book called Chariots of the Gods in the 70s, and he's still active. I in fact, talked to him earlier today. And he is currently writing book number 32. And since 1998, we've been publishing Legendary Times magazine together, which is the only magazine in the world that's exclusively dedicated to the ancient astronaut field. So, the idea is that the stuff that we publish in there is all about the ancient mysteries, but of course with a focus on ancient aliens. So it's not anything else where, some other alternative history experts, they're maybe looking at some other ideas or other interpretations, but our magazine is strictly ancient astronauts, which suggests that possibly Earth has been visited by extraterrestrials in the remote past.
I believe that it has, and I know a lot of my listeners do as well. And, I even believe that we've had intelligent civilizations living on this planet before, way before what they tell us now. So I agree with you there. Now, is the History Channel this going to be a long deal here with the Ancient Aliens? Because I'll tell you, very popular show. I love it myself.
Well, thank you, and I'm really happy to hear that, because it's really a wonderful success, and I'm really proud and also excited to tell all of our listeners tonight that we are, in fact, in production for Season 3
Awesome.
of Ancient Alien Categories, how we tried to prove this.
Mm-hmm.
And the big one, obviously, is where all over the world, it doesn't matter what ancient culture or what continent you go to, in ancient times, there are always these descriptions of the gods. And today, mainstream archaeologists, they themselves say that most all of the ancient monuments were in fact built or constructed because of the gods, to worship them, to honor them, to have rituals about them, what have you. And they openly say this, that all these ancient monuments were built for the gods. And then they pat each other on the back, they go home, and they say, case closed. Well, see, to people like me, that this is where the investigation begins. Because if I hear or read in ancient texts that these structures were built for the gods, then my immediate question is, who were these gods?
Mm-hmm.
Were they really just a figment of our ancestors' imagination? Or, as I think, were they really flesh and blood extraterrestrials whom our ancestors misinterpreted or mistook for divine spiritual beings, which of course they never were? Because, look, to sum this up really fast, extraordinary day to be having the interview today because of the whole thing that Obama had to go through about finally releasing his birth certificate, or his long-form birth certificate. I mean, it was an absolute circus about all of this, and for our president to have to go through something like this, I mean, there's bigger problems this country has. So it's unbelievable what a sideshow it has been, and hopefully this has all been put to rest now. But you'll never know, because, like I said, you can present something to someone, and even though it's right in front of them, crystal clear, they'll still say that this is wrong, or this can't be like this, or no, you're wrong.
Well,
I mean, it's unbelievable.
Questions are already coming out about it. I seen it on the internet already. There's people already asking questions, and I know Donald Trump is taking great pride in feeling that he forced it.
It's really amazing that he's taking that slap to his face and he's using it to his advantage. Unbelievable. I mean, you got to give it to him. The guy's entertaining. That's all I have to say.
Oh, he sure is. He sure is. All right, Giorgio, what is the ancient astronaut theory? Can you tell us what your opinion is on that, your research?
Of course. I mean, look, the basic definition of the ancient astronaut theory is to determine whether or not extraterrestrials, flesh and blood extraterrestrials, mind you, have visited Earth in the remote past. That's kind of the definition of it. And of course, there's many subcategories